Well, good morning, everybody. A very warm welcome to our peopleHUB session for today. If you've not met me before, my name is Victoria Brown and I am your chair of peopleHUB. We have a series of webinars that we run across the year. We also have a closed LinkedIn and Facebook group, I believe, as well. So if you've not a member, I'll send you all the details later for how you can join this peopleHUB community. So today we have employment law in 2025. We're going to recap a little bit about 2024, and no doubt we'll be talking about things that are going to happen in 2026. If you are a business owner or a HR professional, you know how busy we all are at the moment with the forever changing employment law timetable. So I am delighted that we have Kendal Hulme, who is back by popular demand, to talk us through these changes that are coming through. But before then, you will notice that we are sponsored proudly by 1HR. It's fantastic that they do sponsor us because that ensures that we can offer these seminars and our community for free. So before I do move on, I'm just going to give Mike from 1HR a little opportunity just to tell you a little bit about him and 1HR. So over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Vic. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be sponsoring this peopleHUB event. So just thought I'd take 1-2 minutes just to tell you a little bit about what 1HR actually is. So we are a all-in-one HR software, essentially. So we developed the software to help businesses of all sizes, but particularly businesses who are growing, SMEs. So the software will grow with you as your business grows as well. And basically, the idea behind it is to help you save time and energy and basically simplify your HR and health and safety management. So a few of the things that we can do, holiday and absence management, you can store employee information, sort of unlimited document storage as well. So changing policies, as we'll hear about in this session, you can get them uploaded onto the system and push them out so everyone's aware of them. And as I mentioned before, we also have a health and safety element to it as well. So if we have an incident log, so any accidents, near misses, can be logged there and safely dealt with. We also have the ability to complete audits on the software, and essentially the whole system has a really good level of automation. So tasks, reminders, reminders to update certifications for employees, things like that. So the whole software will seamlessly and smoothly help you stay compliant, essentially. So I will throw my contact details in at the end of this. If anyone wants to jump on the call to discuss the software more or book a demo of it, more than happy to accommodate that. So yeah, thanks, Vic.
Great, thank you very much, Mike, and thanks obviously for the sponsorship. So we'll share Mike's details if anyone does want to have a chat with Mike, and he's just a great guy to have a chat with. Before we start, we have, as some of you will know, if you want to ask questions, Kendal will be very keen to answer all your questions. Ask as many as possible. I will. Look at her face. But to do that, what we can do, you can either pop it in the chat if you're on your phone or use Slido. So on the screen now, you'll see the QR code. If you just want to follow that link on your phone to the Slido, that is the app that we use. It's a great opportunity. You can ask any questions you want. It remains anonymous if you want it to stay anonymous, and then it also sort of has a bit of a polling. So at the end, we'll pull that up onto the screen. So two options for you: either pop them in the chat or use Slido. So I am now going to stop talking and I'm going to hand you over to Kendal.
Thank you for having me back. Third time now. I don't know whether this is a good or a bad thing, but I know that obviously the Employment Rights Bill has kind of sent everybody into a bit of turmoil. So lots to talk about today, and we'll crack on if that's all right. So I think we want opportunities to go through a Q&A. So let's get stuck in. So yeah, Employment Rights Bill kind of sent us all a bit last year. It was anticipated that there was going to be a huge overhaul of policies coming in this April. Thankfully, as it stands, a lot of the proposed changes are either still being considered or not actually being implemented for some time. So fingers crossed we've got a little bit more breathing space on those. Today we're going to look at first the actual confirmed changes that we've got, and then move on to some of the expected and potential changes that we're going to look at in 2025 and most likely beyond, as Vic said, 2026, possibly even further away. And whilst we're talking, I'll give you a few tips as well on how HPC can help, how we've been helping our clients. And yeah, let's get stuck in. If we can go to the next slide, Dan. Thank you. So recap then of 2024, we had the Worker Protection Act 2023, the harassment. We covered this quite in depth in last September's peopleHUB as the amendment came in October. The Act introduced significant changes aimed at preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. The key points being, starting from October, employers are required to take proactive and reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment of their employees. So it's not just about dealing with it if it arises, it's actually preventative measures as well. This includes creating new policies, training managers, fostering a safe environment where employees feel empowered to report that harassment. The Act covers harassment from not just colleagues now as well, though. It's also about third parties. So that's your customers, service users, members of the public, clients, any third party that your staff may come into any kind of interaction with. And employers must now address those risks and take preventative measures to ensure that there's a harassment-free workplace. In terms of assessing the risks, that's a risk assessment needs to be conducted within your organisation, and you need to implement reasonable measures to mitigate these risks. The aim of this being obviously to take a proactive approach to help eliminate harassment before it actually does occur. These changes, of course, emphasise the importance of creating a zero tolerance culture towards sexual harassment and any form of harassment, and ensure that your staff are in a safe and respectful work environment. So at HPC, we've delivered so many courses to our clients, including specific training tailored for management, as well as general awareness for team members, because there are two different versions that we provide, depending on the level and in-depth amount of awareness that you want for your staff. We've spent countless hours as well updating handbooks, creating policies, supporting clients, implementing the changes. And also we've supported quite heavily on the risk assessments as well for our clients, guiding them through the actions as well on these. So that's included, posters and whatnot throughout the workplace. So the next one, please, Dan, that was also brought in was the allocation of tips. So this introduced several changes to ensure fair distribution of tips, gratuities, we always get those two, tongue twister, and service charges amongst your workers. So employers are now required to pass on all tips, gratuities and service charges to workers without any deductions, ensuring that your workers receive the full amount intended by the customers that have given them. You must fairly and transparently distribute tips, and employers can choose how you do this, though. There's also now a statutory code of practice, which was established as part of this as guidance on the fair and transparent distribution of tips and gratuities. And this code helps ensure consistency and fairness in how tips are handled. Tips must be paid to employees by the end of the month that follows the month in which the tips are paid by customers. So if tips are given in March, then they'd need to be paid by the end of April. Employers who regularly receive tips are also now obliged to have a written tipping policy, and workers can enforce the rights through an employment tribunal as well if they believe that the tips have not been fairly distributed. So they're the two from 2024 that we just wanted to do a quick little recap on, because they're quite big changes that we've done. And just onto the next slide, sorry, Dan. And now we're going to move on to the 2025 changes that are definitely happening. We've done a lot of work so far in the background with our clients getting these in place. Aren't as many this year. Last April was quite admin heavy, burden-wise on the updates. We had the paternity, carers leave, flexible working. So it's slightly kinder this April. So we've got your national minimum wage, which we typically see every year. This increases from the 1st of April. You'll see here that the 21 and over increase is 6.7% at £12.21 an hour, which some may say, I guess, pales in comparison to the 16.3% for your 18 to 20-year-olds, and even higher increase for the under 18s and apprentices. which is 18%, taking them now to £7.55 an hour, which is quite an increase for them. Believe the increase in the 18 to 20-year-old rate is kind of narrowing that gap now between that and the national living wage, which is in anticipation of the adult rate being extended to 18 in the future years rather than 21 as it does stand now. If we move on to SSP and the LEL rates, so statutory sick pay and the lower earnings limit, the LEL, they're set to increase from the 6th of April. SSP is going to increase by £2 to £118.75 a week. And the last time the LEL was actually increased was in 2022 in the April then. It was raised from £120 to £123 a week. And I think the upcoming April increase is due to the government's decision really to adjust the LEL based on the consumer price index, the CPI rate from September, which was 1.7%, aiming to have the LEL amount aligned with inflation and the cost of living, of course, with everything else that we're seeing going up. So our next slide is about the family-friendly rates. We've got them increasing from the 6th of April, all of which going up to £187.18. That's a £3.15 increase, reflecting a broader trend towards enhancing the support for working families. So that includes, of course, your statutory shared parental pay, statutory maternity pay, statutory adoption pay, statutory paternity pay, statutory parental bereavement pay, and then the introduction of statutory neonatal care pay, which we'll talk about shortly. That's quite a big April update coming in, one of the biggest ones. Next, we have our employer national insurance contributions, the NIC. That's going to take effect on April the 6th as well. Employers are now going to face higher NIC costs, which I'm sure is not a welcome increase from employers. The secondary NIC threshold is going to drop from 9,100 to 5,000. Employer NIC rate will rise from 13.8% to 15%. And this is to ease some of the burden. To ease some of the burden, the employment allowance is going to increase from 5,000 to 10,500, which will benefit some of the smaller businesses out there. So there's quite a few things you can do to prepare for those increases to the NIC contributions. Strong financial reporting, you can talk to your finance teams about that. Ensure that you're operating efficiently, of course, like any additional cost, you would need to look at that in your workplace. You could look at potentially as well introducing salary sacrifice schemes. And I know on some previous peopleHUBs, there's been a speaker about salary sacrifice schemes, and specifically you can look at the pension contribution as well, because that can help reduce your NIC bill, as employees can take a lower salary in exchange for the pension contribution, something to consider. There's always the option of looking at, outsourcing self-employed staff. As always, redundancies should absolutely be the last resort, and I'm sure you wouldn't be in that position, but if you ever are, you would absolutely need to seek advice. We deal, unfortunately, a lot with quite a lot of redundancy queries at HPC. It's the nature of the world right now with that, with the cost of living and just the increase in absolutely everything price-wise. So a lot of the reasons, I believe, for the increase are raising revenue for public services. So the government's aiming to raise additional revenue to support the NHS and other public services there. And the changes are also helping align the NIC thresholds and rates with inflation, ensuring that the contributions keep pace with the cost of living. Cost of living, cost of living, cost of living. So our next one is neonatal care pay and leave. And that is the next of the final big one really for April 2025. We've been doing a lot of work on in the background with our clients. This is going to come into place on 6th of April, and it applies to babies that are born on or after the 6th of April. I personally had complications with my second daughter. I spent quite a bit of time in the neonatal unit with her at our hospital when she was born. So from my perspective as a mother, this is a very welcome update to employment rights. And I'm sure a lot of other people will feel the same who have had similar kind of experiences. It's going to take a little additional pressure off people in a really difficult time. So neonatal care pay and leave, it will provide employed parents with a day one right of up to 12 weeks of leave if their babies are admitted to neonatal care. This leave entitlement will be on top of other family leave entitlements. It is in addition to this, it's not instead of. And if eligible, parents will also be entitled to up to 12 weeks of statutory pay. There is eligibility for the leave, as there is with the majority of the other leaves we've got. It's a day one right for a wide range of parents, including adoptive parents who are fostering, and the intended parents in surrogacy arrangements as well are also captured within this. It applies to babies admitted within the first 28 days of life and have a continuous stay in hospital for at least 7 days. Parents can take a minimum of 1 week and a maximum of 12 weeks leave, and this will depend on how long their baby is actually in neonatal care. So the eligibility for pay, some parents may also be eligible for up to 12 weeks statutory neonatal care pay. To qualify for this, they must have worked for their employer for at least 26 weeks and earn on average at least the £125, the LEL, before tax from April 2025. So bear with me on this bit because there's 2 leave and pay tiers, a little bit more complex than your statutory maternity pay, and although I think shared parental pay and leave is probably one of the more complex, but we're adding a level of complexity to this one as well. So for tier 1, this is the period when the baby is still receiving neonatal care, and it includes 1 week after the care has ended. Leave can be taken flexibly in multiple blocks of at least 1 week. The employee should inform their employer before they would be due to start work on the first day of absence or as soon as possible following admission. Notice of tier 1 leave does not need to be in written form, and that's important because in tier 2 it does need to be in written form. And parents eligible for neonatal care pay should provide written notice for tier 1 neonatal care pay within 28 days, beginning from the first day of the week in which it is being claimed. All of this is going to be really detailed in your policies. We've got an extremely detailed policy for our clients, and kind of going to talk them through that as well when we implement it into the updates in April. So tier 2, this is for the period outside of the period of tier 1 and before the end of 68 weeks from the date of the baby's birth. Leave can only be taken in 1 continuous block. Notice of at least 15 days is required for an employee taking 1 week of leave. If the employee plans to take 2 or more weeks of leave, they will need to provide notice of at least 28 days. And this notice does need to be in written form. And eligible parents claiming tier 2 neonatal care pay should give notice of at least 15 days in advance to claim pay for 1 week's leave. To claim pay for 2 or more weeks of leave, they need to give 28 days notice. So if we go on to the next slide and how we can prepare for that, we've spent the last few weeks drafting policies for our clients, updating their current documentation because we've had to look at all of the family-friendly policies that we've got in place, the contracts as well that may refer to any statutory entitlements, and a lot of work does go into the background of any of these updates. Things that you or your HR team, if you don't work with HPC, you need to do is review, update your parental leave policies to reflect these changes. Train your managers as well. It's really important here that you're making sure that they're aware of all of these updates and how to handle the request with sensitivity as well, because it really is an important, difficult, scary time for the employee, any child that has to go into neonatal care. So sensitivity is really key here. So upskilling your management as well on possibly difficult conversations would be a good one. You're probably going to need to look at adjusting your payroll systems as well, just to make sure that they accommodate statutory neonatal care pay calculations, as well as all of the other calculations that you have for statutory pay. And create a supportive culture by providing guidance and support to the employees who may need to take neonatal care. And of course, ensuring there's a clear process in place for requesting and managing neonatal care leave as you would with any other family-friendly. That's it for our Absolute Guarantee 2025. We're going to move on now to the amendments to the Employment Rights Bill and all that comes or doesn't come with that now. The government on the 4th of March announced amendments to be considered at its report stage on the 11th and 12th of March. And the bill is then going to have its 3rd reading in the House of Commons when final changes will be agreed before it goes to the House of Lords. So we do still have quite a lot of time until a lot of these amendments are confirmed, changed again, discounted, disregarded. A lot of this is kind of if and what, and we'll talk through it all. So things have changed. As you know, they've watered down quite a few since the first announcement, which I'm sure a lot of people are very relieved about. The government has set out some amendments, and first one being 0-hour contracts. So your initial proposal was the right for everyone to have a contract that reflects the number of hours they regularly worked. They basically wanted to get rid of what they considered exploitative contracts, being 0-hour contracts. This would have been based on a 12-week reference period as well. Workers were going to receive reasonable notice of any change in shifts or working time, and that would include compensation for them that would be proportionate to the notice given for any shifts cancelled or reduced. So in the amendment that they've put out this month, agency workers are now going to be included in this 0 hours ban, aiming to ensure that agency work does not become the loophole, if you will, in the plans to end these exploitative contracts. Agency workers will also be included in the right to reasonable notice of shifts and the responsibility for paying for the compensation. So if the shifts are changed or reduced, will be placed on the employment agency, but agencies may well be able to claim this back from the actual hirer. Statutory sick pay was quite a big one. Definitely set to happen when we don't know yet, probably likely to be April or October of 2026, but looks like one it's absolutely going to happen. In the original draft, they have removed the waiting period, so SSP will be paid from day one of sickness absence, and those earning below the LEL would be eligible also. And in the amendment, they've introduced a new SSP after some consultation through the government for the lowest earners. So they will either receive SSP or 80% of their weekly pay, whichever is the lowest of the two. Quite another big one, and one for us all to be considering from a compliance perspective, is the Fair Work Agency. So again, in the initial draft, the government proposed establishing a single enforcement body, which they've referred to as the Fair Work Agency, and that would be to strengthen the enforcement of workplace rights. The enforcement powers would be an ability to enter your business premises to obtain documents and inspect electronic records. So in the amendment, they've added some new powers for the Fair Work Agency. They'll be able to enforce failure to comply with new obligations to keep adequate records of holiday pay. So your adequate records for holiday pay, you need to be keeping for 6 years, just in case anybody wasn't aware of that time period. They can enforce failure to pay certain statutory payments to workers and bring employment tribunal proceedings on behalf of a worker, and also provide legal assistance for employment-related proceedings. They will also potentially then be able to recover their own enforcement costs from the employer for any of these fees. So big one to watch for the Fair Work Agency, and making sure that we're all very, very compliant. I'm sure that everybody is, but continue to be so. So slide 18, just have a quick drink because there's a lot of talking throughout all of this. We've got collective rights. The original proposal on the collective rights was Employment Rights Bill had aimed to enhance collective rights by making it easier for the trade unions to gain recognition and negotiate on behalf of workers. It proposed lowering the threshold for union recognition from 50% to 40% of the workforce. So less people would need to ballot. And the bill has also sought to streamline the collective bargaining process and ensure that employers engage in good faith negotiations with recognised unions. Good faith meaning that to ensure that employers negotiate honestly, fairly with recognised unions, meaning that they should genuinely consider the union's proposals and work towards mutually beneficial agreements, not just lip service, if you will. Amendments announced in March were that they've kept the threshold for union recognition, but added extra measures to protect workers' rights. So we've got new provisions introduced in there to ensure that employers provide reasonable facilities and time off for the union representatives to perform their duties. And the amendments also included stronger enforcement mechanisms, allowing the Fair Work Agency that we've just spoken about to step in and support workers in disputes over union recognition and collective bargaining. So Fair Work Agency is kind of a theme throughout a lot of these changes as well. So continue on to collective redundancies now. We've got currently any employer that is proposing 20 or more redundancies at one establishment within a period of 90 days must go through a process of collective redundancy consultation before the redundancies can go ahead. This includes informing and consulting appropriate representatives of the affected employees, and failing to comply can result in claims for a protective award, which you'll be aware of, which is 90 days uncapped pay for each affected employee that hasn't been consulted with properly. In terms of defining an establishment, that typically means a site or a workplace. So the bill proposed scrapping the establishment-based threshold altogether, and would require a collective consultation with an employer, where an employer proposed 20 or more redundancies across the company as a whole. So not just in one site, but the entire company. The amendment, however, is to not scrap the establishment-based threshold. Therefore, collective redundancy consultation will be required if the employer proposes 20 or more redundancies at one establishment, or another new threshold test is met, which involves counting proposed redundancies across the employing entity as a whole, regardless of the location of those redundancies. Also included in the plans are to double the maximum period of the protection award for collective redundancies from 90 to 180 days. So that's tribunals basically being able to grant larger awards to employees on the basis of this being a much larger deterrent against employees deliberately ignoring their obligations. It's quite a big one again to keep an eye on there for collective redundancies. Moving on to the next slide, we have the protection for employees of umbrella companies. So in our original proposal, we saw it aimed to ensure that the employees of umbrella companies received comparable rights and protections as those directly employed by an employment business. Key provisions of this were employment rights, so ensuring umbrella employees had access to statutory rights such as holiday pay, sick pay, pension contributions, and fair pay, so addressing issues of fair pay and tax compliance by consolidating their earnings and ensuring appropriate tax deductions. We also discussed in the original proposal providing HR support for grievances and employment-related issues to those employees of umbrella companies. In the updates, the recent amendments have introduced more stringent regulations and expanded protections for those employees. Umbrella companies are now classified as employment businesses under this amendment, bringing them under the regulatory scope of the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate and the Fair Work Agency. And the Fair Work Agency, as we know, has been granted extensive powers to enforce compliance, including the ability to inspect reports, enforce statutory payments, and bring employment tribunals, as we previously discussed, on behalf of workers. You have the shift notice and compensation. So we spoke about that just previously. Agency workers, including those employed by the umbrella companies, are now going to be entitled to reasonable notice for shift change and compensation for cancelled shifts. So for those of you that do work in that kind of environment where you may have to cancel a shift short notice, this is one for you to really keep an eye on. And these changes are aiming to close loopholes and prevent exploitative practices, ensuring a fairer and more supportive working environment for those employees of umbrella companies. Our next slide is protection for new mothers. Saw quite a few changes on this last year. And the plans to ban dismissals of employees who are pregnant on maternity leave or who are in the first 6 months of work after returning from maternity leave, except in specific circumstances which haven't yet been set out. It's expected that this right would be applicable during maternity leave as well as upon return, but this is still yet to be confirmed by government, as all of these that we've just discussed about the amendments are. In the amendment, however, it states that the regulations will set out specific notices that will need to be given to the employee, and also evidence the employer will need to produce, and other procedures that will need to be followed. So throughout the £215 page amendment publication, there are explanatory notes throughout that, and the note in this case confirms the intention to ban such dismissals except in specific circumstances. Fire and rehire is our next one. If we could just move on, Dan, thank you. The Employment Rights Bill was designed to really crack down on fire and rehire practices. It suggested that it should be automatically unfair to fire somebody just because they wouldn't agree to the changes in their jobs terms and conditions. And employers would only be able to fire and rehire employees on new terms if they could show that they were having financial difficulties, or they were in some kind of financial struggle that affected their ability to actually keep the business running. The amendments from March kept the tougher rules on the fire and rehire, but they dropped the idea of interim relief for employees who were unlawfully fired and rehired. They also brought in new protections for agency workers, like guaranteed hours and the reasonable notice of shifts. The claim to unfair dismissal from day one of employment was kept, but with a statutory probationary period, which I'm sure you're all waiting with bated breath for us to discuss. And don't worry, I think that is the next slide. So the amendments here are more about strengthening the remedies against abuse of the rule of fire and rehire. So the next one, this is the big one that I believe was, well, it was certainly on our mind and it was on everyone's minds, and it still is that day one right to unfair dismissal. In the initial proposal, it aimed to provide employees with day one rights, including protection against unfair dismissal, statutory sick pay, family-friendly rights such as paternity, parental and bereavement leave. And the biggest day one right that caused the most debate was the bill removed that 2-year qualifying period for unfair dismissal claims, allowing employees to bring these claims from their first day of employment. So, however, an initial period of employment, a statutory probationary period was proposed, during which a lighter touch dismissal procedure could be used for reasons such as capability, conduct, illegality, and other substantial reasons. So updates from March in the amendment, the amendments have refined these proposals. The initial period of employment for unfair dismissal claims is now subject to consultation with a preference for 9 months. So that could be potentially a 6-month probation period with a 3-month extension. So your performance management, your recruitment, tighten up your onboarding processes, it's all going to be really, really important, because whilst we anticipate this is not going to be until probably late 2026, it does look like it's still being pushed through. But albeit that with the probationary period, so it's really important that we're really strict now and stringent and getting these processes right. So how we're looking at preparing and how you should prepare is obviously consider your employment contracts. We're going to have to look at revising those. They need to be clear, comprehensive, outline your expectations, job roles, and your performance management and performance standards are going to have to be absolutely spot on. So implement robust onboarding processes, enhance your performance management processes, training and support. Your management team absolutely need to know about all of these changes and making sure that they are managing that probation period really, really tightly. Review your policies and procedures. We're going to have to change an awful lot there. And of course, promote a positive work culture, and more transparency is going to be needed within your probationary periods. So the most talked about one to date, no doubt, but not much more on that now or any indication of a date. So it's definitely one that we'll all be watching this space on quite closely. So right to bereavement leave after miscarriage. The original proposal covered, it didn't actually include a specific provision for bereavement leave following a miscarriage. This is a potential new addition to the bill. Under existing law, statutory bereavement leave applies only for stillbirth, which is deemed to occur after 24 weeks of pregnancy or the death of a child. The amendments of the Employment Rights Bill have introduced a new right to bereavement leave for parents who experience a miscarriage before 24 weeks of pregnancy. This provision would grant mothers and their partners 2 weeks of statutory bereavement leave, recognising the significant emotional and physical impact of pregnancy loss. So in terms of preparing for that, if this one does go through, we'd obviously need to consider incorporating miscarriage leave into existing bereavement and family leave policies, training for your management as well on handling miscarriage-related leave requests compassionately, sensitively, and mishandling requests, of course, or failing to accommodate these leave entitlements, as with all others, could expose you to grievances and potential legal tribunal claims. So right to switch off, this one, originally there was going to be a new statutory code of practice on the right to switch off aimed at tackling work-life balance concerns. It was to protect employees from being contacted outside working hours except in emergencies, and it put forward that workers who were repeatedly contacted outside of normal working hours may be able to claim uplifted compensation in a successful connected tribunal claim. So, for example, if they had already brought a claim for constructive unfair dismissal or sex discrimination, there would, however, be no right to bring a tribunal claim based solely on a failure to follow the code of practice. However, none of that matters because they've scrapped this now. So reasons for this that we understand is, I think, a lot of pushback and also the pressure on businesses, particularly during economic challenges, And despite it no longer being part of the bill, the government are claiming, however, that they are still committed to addressing issues regarding work-life balance and an always-on culture. So I think that is it in terms of the updates. Thank you for putting up with all of that. It's an awful lot, and I appreciate that an awful lot of that is ifs, whens, buts, and maybes type situation on the Employment Rights Bill amendments. But the big ones for April, of course, are all of your statutory pay increases, and then the neonatal care, a huge one, and the national insurance contributions for employers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kendal. That was really, really helpful. And I think the slides will be really useful as well, obviously, to be able to share, just so that people can just recap and take it all in.
A lot to take in, and a lot not to panic about just yet.
No, but it's the point you make is right. I think we know that the Employment Rights Bill is coming in, and we know some of the changes that there are going to be. Got an idea, so we need to be preparing now in readiness for that, don't we, as sort of HR professionals?
Absolutely. The background work is so important on this right now.
I've got a couple of questions for you, but one of the things I was going to ask you as well is, how have you found, obviously, sort of the changes that are coming in with national insurance and the national minimum wage over the last few years has really impacted particularly small businesses. Have you found there's been a big impact there with people, redundancies, restructures? Have you found that's what you're doing a lot at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, one of a couple of the largest projects that we do with clients at the moment, and the advice that we're given, is on restructures and is on redundancies, and small businesses especially really having to look at costs. It has been a difficult time for them, and it is absolutely one of the most talked about things in our office.
Yeah, because it's a huge impact, and I think when we look at some of the proposed changes, and even the changes that have already happened, huge impact on the hospitality sector as well.
Yeah, huge.
Which have already suffered so much during the pandemic and energy crisis. So yeah, but anyway, never mind, I'll get off my sounding box and we'll move on to the questions. So the first question was on the neonatal slide that you did. I think potentially if we go to the second one first. So with neonatal, can the employer reclaim a proportion of the stat pay as we do with mat and paternity pay?
My understanding as it is at the moment, yes. I will go back and find a link for that, and I can share obviously any answers of any questions that we can't get through today. But yes, my understanding is yes, they can.
Yeah, no, that mine too. It's the same sort of process. Yeah. Okay, sticking on neonatal for now. Regarding neonatal care and how this works, how does it work alongside maternity leave? So this is a great question. So once you start neonatal care, does it stop eligibility for maternity leave? How does it align together?
Yeah, so you take based on the tiering. So your tier 1 would be, you would start neonatal care, then maternity leave. Neonatal leave, then maternity leave. Or you could have maternity leave, then neonatal. So they don't run alongside, they run alongside each other in that it's one and then the other. So you're eligible for both. You don't stop having one.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, what is classed as reasonable notice for cancelling or reducing a shift for a part-time employee? What are the parameters, please?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I would love to know. I would also love to know, and I may go and ask Keir Starmer myself. At the moment, reasonable notice is that's the phrase that we have been given, reasonable notice. Typically, in a lot of other situations in HR and employment law, that tends to be 4 weeks. I appreciate that 4 weeks of cancelling a shift would not be reasonable notice for a business, as you just certainly would not know that. So yeah, that's certainly something we're looking at, some more a clearer definition on when the amendments and the bill continues through Parliament.
I wonder whether it'll be similarly aligned to like the way we holidays, you know, where we sort of double the amount of
Double
time
the
for the,
notice.
yeah, maybe something like that would seem more reasonable, wouldn't it? But the challenge with this as well is what for a lot of employment law, what is reasonable, and a lot of the time we have to sadly see what precedent is set, don't we, through the tribunal system. So it can take a good few years to really be able to be quite clear on what reasonable is.
What reasonable is, absolutely. It's so different in all of the different circumstances, isn't it?
This one is about so if a business has on-target earnings as well as a base rate minimum wage salary, are they obligated to increase pay to match the increases to minimum wage?
I'm not sure I understand this question. If a business has on-target earnings as well as a base rate minimum wage salary, are they obligated to? I guess my answer at this point to that would be you are legally obligated to increase minimum wage to what minimum wage is.
Yeah.
So if you mean more, do you need to match the rest of your workforce that are on higher salaries to the percentage that minimum wage is increased? No, you don't. But you do have the obligation, of course, legally to pay your staff national minimum wage. Apologies if I've not understood that one quite correctly.
I think it would depend on the way your contract's drafted as well, wouldn't it? Because obviously if your contract sort of has that you've got that hourly rate linked to national minimum wage, then you would have to increase that. If it's sort of like a commission base on top of that, you've got to be very careful that you never go below national minimum wage, particularly now because we're going to have some enforcement bodies in place soon, so we need to be very careful, don't we?
So I think, you know, if your salaries at the moment, let's say somebody's on a 40-hour contract and they're on £22,000 a year, that's not going to be minimum wage anymore. So yes, if that is the query, which it possibly is, yes, you're going to have to look at increasing your salaries to, I think, this is completely off the top of my head and would be some ridiculously quick maths. It's about 24,000, I think, now for a 40-hour contract on national minimum wage. But get your payroll team to do the maths on that. But yes, you will have to increase your salaries if they're not hourly meeting that minimum wage. And then I've seen that, how can you, if you only do rotas weekly? I agree. How can you, if you only do rotas weekly? That's on the notice, isn't it, of cancelling? Yeah. No, I
yeah, and we'll obviously we'll continue to do sessions, won't we? So as soon as we start to know and get some more understanding around these changes, we'll let you know so you're well prepared for it. But yeah, and that's the purpose of the consultation at the moment, because the government needs to take into consideration these very points, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if anybody's got the time, energy and brain capacity to read through it, the government have done and they've publicised a lot of the consultations they're doing, and they are seeking interaction with employers on these matters. So if you do want to have your say, and certainly say, how can you, if you only do rotas weekly, go through the government website, have a look and join in that consultation, because it really is important.
Absolutely, definitely. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. If there's any other questions, that's so true. At least we will always be needed, won't we?
Will
that's
always
what's
be
important.
Thank you, Labour.
Well, thank you for your time, Kendal.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for everyone for attending today, because I think if it demonstrates that you care about your people, that you want to keep obviously abreast of the changes. We will do other sessions on this to see how we can, and that's the purpose of a community, you know, let's share ideas and let's see how we can be prepared as businesses for our clients in readiness for a lot of these changes that some don't feel particularly very business friendly. So we need to look at that and work together. Please keep your eyes peeled for our next session. That is in May. So we will send you some details on that if you are registered with us. If you are not a member of peopleHUB, we'd love you to join. Dan, do we have a slide on that? Here we go. So thank you for attending today. If you are If your job involves people in any way, whether that be in HR, health and safety, business owner, then you hopefully would really benefit from attending our webinar sessions and joining our community. So please do follow the links there. We will share the slides from today. And if you've got any other questions, please do. You've got that ability to ask any other questions if you don't feel that we've quite answered them today for you. But thank you so much for your time. Have a great day, and we'll see you all soon.